As Anthony Reed suggests, Kamau Brathwaite's Sycorax Video Style remains under-theorized, and yet remaining under-theorized, i.e. below the possibility of theory or thought to reach, to remain forever submerged, as Brathwaite might say tidialectic, archipelagic, or opaque, is a fundamental Sycoraxian quality. Hence these spaces, hence these lacuna, hence the Sycorax Video Style. Reed's chapter on the Sycorax Video Style in Freedom Time is the best I know, and better than I could produce, so I refer readers to that writing for a fuller understanding of the theoretical underpinnings of the Sycorax Video Style. And yet, Reed himself notes the paradoxical aspects of Sycoraxian style, a style he calls a pangeneric textuality of the plural instant that brings thematic and formal attention to the underlying principles of organization, of inclusion and exclusion that genre and publication entail. It is this part, what is excluded, that I'm interested in here. And I have to begin at the outset with an announcement of my failure to find it. While critics have produced endless pages describing the Sycorax Video Style's use of Calibanisms, multiple fonts, poetic remediations, and republications, rhythms both sonic and visually noisy, a notable anxiety emerges from this chorus of scholars who nearly without fail must mention the impossibility of adequately citing the Sycorax Video Style in their own critical publications. In this way, an overview of the literature on Sycorax yields the negative shape of an unthought thinking occurring in and as Sycorax that no literary critic can satisfactorily theorize or even cite. At the most radical extreme, I suggest that one of Sycorax's most powerful spells forces critics into a position of total failure. Like Shakespeare's missing witch Sycorax, who is excluded from The Tempest but included by name, thus making her something like pure citation, or hypostatization of the limits of the fictive situation, the Sycorax Video Style is inappropriable, uncitable, and fundamentally excluded from the language game of literary critical performative utterance. Elsewhere I explore this problem in more detail, but suffice it to say that we have not, as a culture, authorized the citation of magical realist entities to underwrite the performative force of literary critical theorization. Further, it is impossible to say what is or is not Sycorax, because that identity is one of a radical totality describing an amorphous body of work that we might only reduce to the author function Kamau Brathwaite to our detriment. While many scholars, and even Brathwaite himself, occasionally refers to the Mac SE30 and other computers that Brathwaite used to create the Sycorax Video Style as Sycorax, it is evident that scholarly consensus and dissensus, in fact, suggests a much more diffuse and percolating force as Sycorax, something that begins, as Brathwaite writes as early as 1982, with this understanding of Sycorax as a paradigm for all women of the Third World who have not yet, despite all effort, reached the trigger of visibility which is necessary for a whole society. And that, over time, comes to be called, in his book Conversations, co-authored by Nathaniel Mackey and set by Christopher Funkhauser, an inciter of growth and a motivator of speech for the future, a sort of hidden mother, able to care and feed without credit. This last bit, as so much of the Sycorax Video Style does, challenges academic literary critical conventions. Indeed, it inverts them. Here Sycorax quotes and comments on text from a paper written by student Maria Headley for Brathwaite's spring 1997 undergraduate seminar on magical realism. If conventionally the scholar should cite an established name to underwrite the strength of their rhetoric, here Sycorax quotes a student who expresses Sycorax better, bolder, more outrageously imaginative than anyone I've yet heard. Headley continues, ventriloquized by Sycorax, that Sycorax has the ability to be the most important character on a plantation without even being present to witness her importance. For the scholar attempting to cite Headley, they must first understand that the original is unobtainable, and so must cite, on Sycorax's word, Sycorax citing Headley in Conversations, ostensibly as Brathwaite. In this way, the Sycorax Video Style tacitly undermines the entire system of the evaluative citation index, a measure of value increasingly little more than an index of neoliberalism's false mask of meritocracy. This forced poetics means, in the context of Sycorax, that citationality gains a superpositional aspect, an aspect beyond the well-trammeled matrix of the illocution, perlocution, distinction, iterability, and the constative and performative. Here there emerges a fissural riveting between the constative and performative, a fissure that cites, rather than the iterability of the text, those extracurricular forces of neoliberalism that are, by 2000, quickly threatening to become the curriculum itself. Derrida refers to this as a weak force that is, weirdly, always stronger than the performative, because it is what performativity depends on. With this notion of force, Derrida is drawing on J.L. Austin's own description of the locution, illocution, perlocution situation and the performative constative binary as similar to the special and general theories of relativity. So Derrida seems to be finding a new weak force in the discursive situation, perhaps something like the weak interaction, that is, the mechanism of interaction between subatomic particles that is responsible for the radioactive decay of atoms brought on by the force carrier particles that are almost instantaneous, lasting 10 to the negative 24th of a second and nearly nowhere, covering a range of about 10 to the negative 17th or negative 16th centimeters, close to non-existent. And yet, it exists. I'm trying to suggest that in the undecidable Headley citation, there exists something like this forceful undoing of the organizing system authorizing the professor's performative utterance, a Sycoraxian instant that remains radically unappropriable and unthinkable, even as it thinks without us, all about us. On another level, Sycorax is just simply hard to publish and hard to obtain. These books are literally, for some, impossible to read. Finding certain of the books written in this style, especially works like Barbadian poems, Magical Realism, and Goliquati 2000, huge tomes of Sycoraxian poetics that include poetry, intellectual autobiography, reprints of paintings, cultural theory, anthropology, history, and more, is itself a struggle. To do so requires a force of will and circumstance that borders on the aleatory. Further, publishing the Sycorax video style is notoriously difficult, a difficulty that Brathwaite affirmatively and ceaselessly commits to, despite that commitment creating constant feuds with publishers. Feuds Brathwaite does not shy away from recounting in the Sycorax video style itself, such as this letter from a New Directions editor encouraging Brathwaite to compromise his style and lamenting that New Directions has already lost $20,000 trying to publish his books, tying Sycorax to total loss and pure expenditure. Sycorax, finally, always escapes, evading thought by itself thinking without us, fugitive, inappropriable, inaccessible, impossible. I think then perhaps we should not really try to describe the style, but like Brathwaite demonstrates throughout his complex voix, to understand with it. Hence this video style of my own. A certain trajectory of poetics as minor philosophy, as Charles Bernstein puts it, advances what Joan Retallack calls an experimental poethics, the constant question, what things can be known only by means of poetry? A realm of discourse that is also a constant finding. As Susan Howe writes, finding is the first act. And in this finding we might sound phonic echo signals, negative shapes of what is that we do not and cannot know or think. We might include in this anti-discursive, heterogeneric non-category poetic experiments like Shelley's defense of poetry itself, César's Return to a Native Land, Howe's My Emily Dickinson, Amiri Baraka's Blues People, Ming-Chi and Ma's theorization of a poetics of counter-method, of no method, Theresa Cha's Dictée, Lynn Heginian's allegorical avant-garde, Brian Kim Steffens' Word Toys, Poetry and Techniques that tries to think what the poem does, Craig Dworkin's materialist poetics, and even Sylvia Wynter's radical theoretical intervention. At the end of her stunning Towards the Sociogenic Principle, Wynter argues for a science that will link the study of words with the sociogenic principle as a transculturally applicable constant able to serve as the common reality of our varied cultural modes of being. She continues, given that within the viewpoint specific to our present, culture's biocentric conception of the human, not only must the phenomenon of mind and conscious experience remain a puzzle, but the processes by means of which we objectively construct ourselves must necessarily continue to remain opaque to us. Rhyming with Edouard Glissant's notion of opacity, where the literary text plays a contradictory role of producer of opacity because the writer renounces an absolute. Thus does the Sycorax video style locate agency in the words themselves, as Anthony Reed writes, as they form and deform poetry and articulate new possibilities of poetic time, reconfiguring the link in the imagination between the past and the present in order to welcome the coming of the new. The emphasis throughout much of Brathwaite's work on tropes of orality and calling addresses itself to the still unknown, the still submerged, in everyday experience. Sycorax's foregrounded mediality, a precondition of the sharing of experience, develops what is already implicit in the notion of nation language, the fluctuating moment of the arrivant, the unknown, and the not yet named. So, infrastructuralist writing, I propose, understands in these organizing processes of the yet to be known. Towing the line by wiping it from the sand of the literary, the non-literary, the autobiographical, and the theoretical, the cringe and the camp and the choral and the crusty, the Sycorax Video Style is a self-professed post-modem dialectics, and in this exact phrase signals its staging of 20th century literary theory against its own transformative theatrical dialectics. In the below Sycorax rendering of post-modem dialectics, it seems as if the N of postmodern absorbs its preceding R by osmosis, or vice versa, a migration that makes a new name, which signifies a transit way of communication. Thus, it references the literary critical discursive category in absentia, a paragrammatism that is doubled by Brathwaite's concept dialectics, which, among other things, literally disrupts the letter order of dialectics, shifting I before D and adding an anacrustical T to pun on dialectics while transforming it into the reverberating, resonating tidal flow Kamau Brathwaite made an anti-career flaunting. One is submerged in details. The bolding of submergence makes the already pixelated version of Athens, one of Apple's original typefaces, difficult to read, partially submerging itself by something like an interruptive caesura in reading's normative rhythms. Like Me also literally sits below the word submergence, a double negation that yields not the ha-ha of Alfred Jarry's famous pataphysician, but the he-he-he of a mischievous spirit who, just as quickly as they laugh at us in scorn, can take on the appearance of the decidedly unamused baby of famed Apple font designer Sarah Kerr's iconic Cairo, an early set of Macintosh dingbats. Dingbats, before playing the role of placeholders for glyph failures in digital text, were printers' tools created to save time adorning texts, ready-made embellishments that also often function as a printer's signature, and a way to remind readers of the signature way a printer's technique inhabited the page. Like a signature style, these adornments and embellishments play an extra-linguistic didactic function, directing readers to provenance and or other aspects of the reading situation external to the printed page, while embellishing or challenging with jewels of memory the reading experience by baroquely beautifying the page. In this way, dingbats reduce the means of language to signature, not unlike Brathwaite's use of the square-like screen in Conversations and his overall idiosyncratic use of font and image characteristic of his style. Style, as Anthony Reed writes of the Sycorax Video Style, marks and exploits gaps in signifying structures whereby meaning can be unfixed, in this case articulating the pre-modern with the modern and insisting on words' capacities to live off away from the page you can see, like see their sound, the result being a style you really have to see rather than read aloud. That digital dingbats are an essential feature of the SXVX is often overlooked, and is one point where the SXVX hypostatizes inscriptive technology. The shift from the notion of a dingbat as a signature embellishment and time saver in the context of manual printing to the notion of a dingbat as a signature placeholder for a digital failure in presenting text signifies a radical reordering of our conception of linguistic space relative to the medium language travels in. The goofiness of the digital dingbat aims to alleviate our frustration with the glitching system, to provide a moment of relief during its dysfunction, so that we might laugh at the anonymity of the hollow, anonymous, corporate set of signifiers, reminding us that, after all, we're only dealing with a stupid machine that cutely speaks to us in meaningless pictures, when in fact it operates through sophisticated code running on a machine whose existence is only possible by way of even more sophisticated, decidedly not cute, supply chains. Cairo is the African mask of the post-modem dialectic. The dingbat font Cairo appropriates the concept of Egyptian hieroglyphics, denuding hieroglyphics of their identity as a complex functional system of writing that works by combining representational imagery, phonemic signification, and situational clarification. The font Cairo wears a racist minstrel mask by reductively appropriating Egyptian pictographic writing. Ironically, it does this to name a font used to stand in for glyph failure, i.e. as the symbolic signifier of a submerged or absent intended mark. In this sense, they are literally negative meaning, meaning in negation, meaning only as potential, virtual meaning. Like a pronoun, they signify any character precisely by negating what they point to, a missing character. But unlike a pronoun, this negation is absolute. It signals a complete unavailability, a total failure. It is a sign of the less than excluded and non-existent. The only way to see the missing glyphs is by changing font, that is, by using another wellspring of knowledge or alternative epistemology. It's worth noting that on this page, Brathwaite stages this racial colonial technical situation using a distorted version of the font Athens, along with the dingbat Cairo. The pair of Athens and Cairo calls to mind the conflict at the heart of Plato's famous renunciation of writing in the Phaedrus, while doubling Plato's own appropriation of the Egyptian myth of Thoth to make his point that writing will forever alter our relationship to memory. A reader only grasps the subtle play of masking appropriation, minstrelsy, and coloniality with recourse to the software used to write the poems. In this way, Sycorax is not just the software-hardware technical matrix she is often made out to be, in other words, not just a metaphor for the computer, but indicative of the negative knowledge thought by the poem that is unavailable to casual reading, the generally unthought in the reader's apprehension of language on the page. So we can say that in the Sycorax video style, Apple's signature stylistic glyph group is captured by Sycorax, like Caliban is captured by Prospero and held hostage, made to speak for what they submerged by appropriating. This double move of appropriation forces the reader into the space of an enigma that can only be partially unfolded by this kind of investigation. In a move of reverse discourse and reverse discourse, the corporate behemoth's style is redeployed from within a frame within a page that visually onomatopoeticizes the stam stutter in reference to Mackey's own work on Brathwaite in Discrepant Engagement, root fragments, in part a reference to KB's set of essays Roots, splice notes of its own appearance as counterpoint, like an illuminated scroll. Brathwaite refers to Sycorax video style as something like medieval illuminated scrolls, and Ital scroll, Ital short for Italy, where many illuminated scrolls were made. Also tacitly a reference to Pound's Cantos, the first edition of which is an illuminated manuscript. But scroll also refers to the pioneering roundtable chat system, circa 1984, in which a misspelling of scroll became the name for the log of old messages available for later perusal, or to help one get back in sync with the conversation. That is, scroll became the name for a contingent discursive anacrucidical caesural exordium, a way to beginning that is also a leap in media res that both was and wasn't the rhythm of the conversation, because it is the memory of the rhythm. The rhythm itself is the chat. Scroll is material that allows you to re-enter the rhythm of the improvisation. In this sense, scroll is precisely the space of education, school, where we enter the discursive historical web of society to find its discursive rhythms, to get in sync. It's also an Ital scroll, Ital as a Rastafari respelling of vital by elision, as in modern in post-modem, a diet that promotes livity, or the sharing of life energy among living things, generally whole natural foods without chemicals or additives, often vegetarian. A typical Jamaican Ital breakfast might consist of ackee plantain, breadfruit, and mango pineapple juice. That aforementioned elision of V, that is to say vital into idle, we must now suggest negates elision as the proper description of what has occurred, because nothing here is any longer missing. Rather, the word, in fact, was enriched back to life, resurrected by the removal of a letter until the point wherein the word no longer had anything missing, but meant what it said. That threshold is radically indeterminate, but also profoundly undeniable, and we can only say that it occurred retroactively. In this sense, every neologism contains within it the promise from a future anterior time when it will be no neologism at all, and hopefully no dead metaphor either, but a catalyst of our vitals. So the production of the virtual, as the simultaneity of contingency and determination, is not extraneous to language, but intrinsic to it. And just like languaging, this suggests that the paratextual apparatus and situation, in other words, language as pragmatics, the paper dingbat versus the digital dingbat, is inextricable from language qua language, despite the fantasy of a certain caricature of structuralism. That reciprocal relation, we might even go so far to say, between the substrate and the language, between text and paratext, between contingency and determination, or more precisely, where that reciprocity becomes a non-relation because it is an identity, describes the uncircumscribable topos where the dingbat evolves. This poetics of language and infrastructural poetics unifying contingency and determination, like all things, becomes visible only in retrospect, and is most available to us when we sycoraxically video the ontological rhythms of paranomasia and poesis. That is, when we situate as best we can our own epistemology in negative by throwing our understanding of language into creative evolution parallel and intertwined with techniques, while not ever succumbing in total to that world of techniques. When vital becomes ital, it is no longer vital. Rather, it is vitality itself as living language on the move in contexts and determining those same contexts.